In today's class, we will have to start writing about, we are slightly giving a halt to that topic that we have initiated yesterday, that is tribal education. We were supposed to write something. After that, we will go to look at the topic of tribal education. Once again, some brief statistics that we have seen yesterday, we would repeat, and maybe perhaps we will go to tribal health. This is the primary target, and I actually would want to take you to topics such as development, displacement. I was asking him to give some additional planners. If you need, you can ask them. They'll provide you with the planners. But I thought I would start my class with one small video which runs into about maybe 1.5 minutes. It's a government advertisement.
New sun in the lives of these Vanvasis. A revolution that brought alive the dying hopes. A revolution called Ekal Vidyalaya, with a mission: one village, one school, one teacher. For children, this mission brought into light the importance of education, showing them the way to life. A gradual change was brought into the lives of these Vanvasis, and today, Ekal has reached them to new heights. It has given every child an opportunity to fly, and fly high, to fulfill their dreams, and a chance to breathe free. To take this little ray of hope to every corner of the country, and to give every child a teacher whom he can look up to, is what Ekal looks forward to achieve. Today, Ekal Vidyalaya has reached almost all the states of the country, and hence, this revolution has garnered more and more support. And your support can see every child take the path to a bright future. Let's make an effort to educate each and every Vanvasi. Let's make their dreams come true. Because education can help shape the future of India and realize our mission. Sarva Shiksha, Sarva Samruddhi.
हे हंस वाहिनी ज्ञानदायिनी अम्ब विमलमति दे अम्ब विमलमति दे
for that smile. Things look so very happy, hopeful, appreciable. But can you recall any childhood memory where you were so very joyous to go to the school, you know, up slate लेकर हंस हंस के, you know, नाच नाच के जा रहे हो, kind of. But then garment का advertisement है, song was well written, lot of time they have spent on it. This is one of the schemes. आप घर जाइए और देखिए whether this scheme is still functioning. It was actually very comically put by one of my teachers. They talk about one village, one community, one school, one teacher, maybe one student, don't know. So, or maybe he is also not there and teacher is teaching himself. Where the teacher is, that's also one big question. ये एक एकल विद्यालय, I want you to study this. Sir, in the previous class I was talking about Tribal Affairs Ministry, from where certain things have to be done. I have placed a brochure in the drop box which you must have seen, that is National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. The brochure is very comprehensive actually. The details of the provisions, constitutional provisions, various schemes, etc. Well written in a very crisp form. So that, you know, if you are, even if lifting the same stuff for your exam, happily 100, 120 word answers can be written from that single document. And apart from that, I would want you to go through several education related schemes which I will be listing in today's class. But before that, there was one that I did not do in the previous class. We will start with that particular thing, that is approaches to tribals. We'll take a short note on this because many times we have spoken of the three approaches. Formally, if an answer has to be written, definitely because you are writing an anthropology answer, here and there some sprinkling of thinkers' names, researchers, that is very much advisable. So keep writing. An anthropological inquiry into approaches to tribals has been a subject of discussion from the pre-independent times. Anthropologists themselves were divided on the approach to tribals. Popularly, three approaches are suggested. One, isolationism. Two, assimilationism. Three, integrationalism. Continue writing there. On coming to conclusion about one of these to be an approach to tribals, write in the brackets, especially if one concludes on integrationalism, close the bracket, several other approaches to tribal development, were suggested. The later becomes the subject matter only if one chooses either assimilation or integration. We'll go through those tribal development approaches later. First you write down isolationism. It was the earliest policy towards the tribals. Generally followed during the British rule, as the British government maintained that tribals shall be left for themselves and their culture shall not be interfered into. The policy of isolation was primarily suggested by anthropologists and missionaries who aimed at maintaining tribal cultures in their original form without adulteration. On the other hand, the opponents of isolationism criticized the concept as the one leading to neglect of the tribals. Nevertheless, the ones with sympathetic understanding of tribal problems were also instrumental in bringing legislations such as Scheduled Tracts Act of 1870 and Scheduled Districts Act of 1874. They dealt with one, restricting or barring the non-tribals establishing habitat in the tribal areas. Secondly, protecting the rights of governance, of tribal regions by tribals themselves. Protecting the governance of tribal regions by tribals themselves. Keep writing. The Government of India Act 1919 was instrumental in the culmination of a policy towards tribal administration, in the Act of 1935, wherein excluded and partially excluded areas were recognized and created with different levels of self-governance. The main thrust of all these initiatives was to respect the isolation and distinctiveness of the tribals. Right in the next paragraph. Among the anthropologists, Verrier Elwin, who worked as the advisor on tribal affairs to Government of India, was prominent in recommending isolationism. He advocated establishment of, write in quotes, national parks for tribals, where the contacts with the outside world should be minimum. Hutton, 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 a commissioner for census 1931, suggested isolationism in order to stop any uncontrolled acculturation, underline, uncontrolled acculturation. Apart from cultural isolation, he suggested creating self-governing units. Right in the next slide. Hutton and Elwin were criticized for recommending the policy of isolation which would leave the tribals as museum or zoo exhibits. Instead, one could adopt the policy that might use the tribal knowledge and mainstream knowledge for improving conditions of tribal life. Write the next side head there. Assimilationism. It refers to ultimate incorporation of tribals into the mainstream, forcing them to sever their relations with the cultural past, with their cultural past. This was on the other extreme. Of approaches which clearly propagates ethnocide and ethnocentrism. Both from humanistic welfare state and anthropological perspectives. Humanistic welfare state and anthropological perspectives. The approach was not welcome. M.N. Srinivas, right in the next line, M.N. Srinivas Burgess and Elliott Park defined assimilation as a process of interpretation in which one group acquires attitudes and sentiments of the other group thereby replacing their original cultural patterns, by the alien cultures. Thakkar, A.V. Thakkar pleaded for, T-H-A-K-K-A-R, popularly known as Thakkar Bapa. There was one NGO, Thakkar Bapa Foundation, very popular in several places of Maharashtra. Right. Thakkar called for keeping the tribals confined or isolated in their inaccessible geographies, to help them out from encountering any efforts of isolation, any efforts of assimilation. For him, maintaining such an isolation was clearly to place them at a stage so that anthropologists can carry out academic processes. For Thakkar, tribal problems such as poverty, illiteracy, ill health, etc., are the given of culture contact, and hence shall be avoided. Right in the next paragraph. According to Ghurye, tribals are backward Hindus. And it is in their best interest. That they should be completely assimilated into the Hindu culture. Remember this statement. for the rest of your lectures. Because Ghurye was such an influential person. By the way he was commanding anthropology of India, by the way he was holding positions, by the way he was dictating terms. I am not being critical of him, but then sometimes a single individual might give a particular direction to the entire discipline. So when you are calling tribals as backward Hindus, you have already nullified their cultural speciality, cultural uniqueness. It's only that you are placing them as somebody who is still to evolve to attain much more complex form of Hinduism. They might be at a very basic level of animistic Hinduism. And this was taken seriously by several people in the discipline itself. And if at all a major rift had to come among the academicians of anthropology, it was after Ghurye's such writings and statements, with due respects. I have told you some time back the problem between M.N. Srinivas and G.S. Ghurye. At that time I told you that Srinivas was writing, and my request and my application was not actually processed, and I did not get an invitation from G.S. Ghurye. I had been waiting. Maybe because he is a biological anthropologist and I am a social anthropologist, and because of which maybe he did not take me into the organization or the position. When he was making these statements, Srinivas was not actually looking at how each of them were considering cultural uniqueness. But later, in the post-autobiographical essays, the other writings which M.N. Srinivas made, there he was actually mentioning this, that in a way Ghurye's writings strengthened the tendency of Indian anthropology to be an old physical anthropology, a divisive one, a categorizing one. But he expresses his surprise when he says that suddenly when it comes to tribal and mainstream division, Ghurye was taking a comfortable position by unifying them. Are you following what I am saying? Are you with me? The class, are you with me? Are you with me? I repeat what I said. Read the statement that you have written to yourself. G.S. Ghurye's statement that tribals are backward Hindus, and look at that, you are telling them what is good for them. Just imagine somebody coming and telling you what is good for you. I am really afraid whether you would take the solution, take the suggestion in the first place. And most of us, the stage of life where we are, we in the sense all of us, I am also of your same age group, I don't think we are in a position to consider these suggestions respectfully. Forget about somebody from outside your family. From within your own loving family, if somebody comes up with some kind of a suggestion, you would be the last one to accept it. Just imagine somebody who is not connected to the tribals, who doesn't know what they actually look for, how actually they live. And they are coming and suggesting that, see, you will be better off if you are totally assimilated into Hinduism. Actually, this particular way of reaction of G.S. Ghurye was compared to a variant of missionary zeal in Hinduism. We have said many times, in Hinduism there is nothing like a conversion, there is nothing like a missionary activity. Here the mission is that you come, sit with me in the temple, kind of a thing. So critics also went to the extent of saying that if at all it was Christian missionary activity, at least there was a combination of missionary and Christian. So conversion plus some kind of a service that you do. But when it comes to G.S. Ghurye, it is like the mission that he had of Hinduizing the tribes. The mission of Ghurye was nothing more than, I have nothing against Ghurye. What I am saying is the comments that are given by Srinivas. Sometimes, it might look that I am having an undue bending towards M.N. Srinivas, that I truly accept, that I am totally bent towards M.N. Srinivas. By the way, he has actually presented the whole thing. Sir, whatever discussion that we are having right now, Ghurye versus M.N. Srinivas, you can use this discussion also in the questions such as contributions of M.N. Srinivas to anthropology. Because in those writings, we were mostly making it very conspicuous that Srinivas was the one who contributed to caste studies. And we haven't actually anywhere spoken about tribal contributions by him. So you can in those answers make this remark, you can add this, that though he was not somebody who was doing full-fledged ethnographic works on the tribals, he was giving his opinions on what has to be the approach of the mainstream and the government towards the tribals. So here, going back to what M.N. Srinivas was saying. I said that in his earlier writings, Srinivas was unhappy that he was not given a position in Anthropological Society of India. And he was talking about maybe the difference is due to the sub-branch to which we belong. He cannot take me because maybe he could not take me because I was a social anthropologist and he was a biological anthropologist. But at a later point of time, he understands that it is not simply that biology versus culture, it is much more deeper. Sometimes, in order to avoid any kind of confrontation, we avoid talking to the person itself. By the way people write and speak and contribute various articles, etc., you can understand their personality. So maybe perhaps Ghurye already knew the kind of personality Srinivas was having. And hence he must have thought that both of us together cannot work. Now Srinivas' comment once again about Ghurye. Ghurye is very popular, we all know him. We know him for the kind of listing of characteristics in the definitions. He wouldn't define, but he lists out the characteristics. Also maybe because he came much later to several others, or even during his time, whoever was writing, trying to define, he would gather all the kinds of definitions and then tries to give a list of things. Ghurye was also important for his racial studies and racial classifications. What Srinivas says was that when Ghurye was focusing on racial classifications, he was in a way giving a characteristic to Indian anthropology, the characteristic of being an old school of physical anthropology. You know what is the old school of physical anthropology? We said that it is mostly to do with classification and then categorization of people, etc. So what Srinivas thought was that he was trying to pull back anthropology to the old physical anthropology of Europe. And then he expresses his surprise that where categorization was actually necessary, Ghurye was not categorizing, meaning that he was talking about respecting, recognizing the uniqueness of the tribals. He was not doing that, and he was calling tribals as backward Hindus. It was not simply that he advocated assimilation of the tribals into the Hinduism in the best interest of the Hindus, in the best interest of the tribals. Is that clear? Right now. D.N. Majumdar unlike Gurye, had put forth the philosophy and programs of tribal welfare. For him, it is not possible to ignore the uniqueness of entire tribal population and leave them to themselves. At the same time, it is also not possible nor advisable to totally assimilate them into Hindu culture. He called for a via media. VIA, which came to be known as integrationalism. Write the next side it. Integrationalism. It refers to respecting the diversity of tribals, sharing the fruits of development of the mainstream with the tribals along with recognizing the tribal genius to decide for themselves. This approach was the theme of a tribal Panchashil, which included, number one, people should be allowed to develop along the lines of their own genius and the mainstream should try to encourage the traditional art and culture. Secondly, tribal rights in land and forests should be respected. Thirdly, mainstream shall try to to train and build a team of their own people for administration and development. Fourthly, there shall not be over administration. There shall not be over administration with multitude of schemes. There shall not be over administration with multitude of schemes. Fifthly, we should not judge results of developmental efforts by statistics or by the amount of money spent, but by the quality of human character that has evolved. Don't understand the character in some other perspective. Write another line there. The later subplans and developmental programs were guided by the 5 principles. So it is to accept that integrationalism, it is not isolation or assimilation. Integration is the objective or the approach, with integration as the primary approach towards the tribals. There were several other things that he was writing. What we should be doing is, once we discuss a good number of tribal problems and tribal welfare schemes and administration of tribal areas, we should once again come back to the Panchashil and see to what extent we had adhered to the principles we have started with. That's where the question had come last year or before last year. What is the relevance of Panchashil in today's times, tribal Panchashil in today's times? So this was the primary decision taken. He had said, the first Prime Minister, the rest of the people agreed, and then started series of schemes, etc. In the process, we are going to see in the later classes the meaning of subplan and how subplan approach was taken a beating intermittently, and then once again we went back to the subplan approach. So this is also one very potential question, tribal subplan. So in such a question, you would be approaching evolutionarily, where the theme had actually started, which year, which plan, what it actually meant, and how the later plan periods have in a way kept aside this very popular approach. And once again, from the 12th plan onwards, government decided that, okay, we will come back to the subplan approach, and then you will talk about whether in the current plan the approach is still followed. That's how the question need to be addressed. Let me take you somewhere else. There is one other small thing as a continuation. So once you have decided that it is integrationalism, at every stage we find that there is a difference of opinion or different ways people are choosing. So when I'm saying this, it makes it very clear that in the first few classes, when we said that this is a very objective kind of a subject, where there can be only one answer for any question. There's nothing wrong in that statement. But then when you actually come to the tribal approaches, approaches to tribal development, we see that there are varieties of ways through which one can plan for. So right now we believe that integrationism is the one that we are following. It should be mutual respect, and whatever we are having, we share with them, and we also say that you grow with your own genius, you also participate. Whether participation is happening at a practical level, that's a different story. But कहने में क्या जाता है? No, kind of a thing. These are the popular approaches to tribal welfare. Of course, a topic of this kind we don't see explicitly in your syllabus, but I thought an idea one should be having, so that we will find an opportunity to say that, okay, we have something called an anthropological approach to tribal welfare. Yes, it is actually the rules that we have to stick for tribal welfare. Whenever you are trying to make any policy or any developmental initiative, you stick to them. It's not only you that should be deciding, they should also be able to decide. And actually, when you are analyzing finally, what must have happened on the field, the last statement looks very encouraging. It is not the money that we have spent, but finally.
All these approaches are related to integration.
Once you have decided over integrationalism, I won't leave you by yourself. I don't want to drag you in. I am going to be via media. Okay. So once you have decided on that, different people have been following suggesting different approaches. So it is like, among the three, I have decided on one. Within the three, there are different people who are suggesting different kind of approaches. Am I clear? Okay. If that is clear to you, in each of them mostly, there is a historical way of looking at things. Political approach to tribal welfare was different at different points of time. So at one point of time, the political master wanted to have an isolationism, but integrationism was only an approach that we have followed in the post-independent times, where we have instruments such as, these are some of them I tried to write, like modern political institutions, or the kind of modern economic institutions, or modern education that we are trying to give them. So political master has decided, so our first Prime Minister had decided that, see, in your best interest, I am making the Panchashil, where we are going to respect what you have. You can continue to have what you are having, if at all that is in your best interest. And if we think that what you are having will not help you, we will have to substitute with what we have. Is that fine? That's the reason why I have written that. The whole thing is a top-down approach. The basic question is, who is the political master to say what is in the best of interest for the tribe? Definitely. No, you'll have to. That's the reason why we said that the discipline actually calls for you taking a stand from the perspective of the downtrodden. Definitely, some kind of fear will be lingering in the mind. Suppose you have written a couple of very highly acidic statements. Till the result comes, you neither can sleep nor do anything else. But then definitely a critical appraisal has to happen. So if at all that kind of a fear is there, you present by mellowing down. So it's as simple as slapping with a chappal by putting it in a cover. properly, chappal ko अच्छे से towel में बांधा and then kind of thing, but definitely you will have to slap. How you do it, that is. Because after all, the existence of anthropology, the existence they claimed by saying that, see, we are there to give a voice to the people who are suffering. See, forget about, I was reading one article written by a person who was doing his PhD in anthropology in some XYZ foreign university, but then he belongs to India. He was writing this. Though I had been doing anthropology discipline for quite a long time, I could not actually understand how a tribal would feel once he is displaced, until a notice had come to me that the roads are to be widened, and then we have to give away certain portion of our land for the construction of the bridge or road, etc. That was the first occasion when I felt how you feel displaced. For them, see, for you are only parting with maybe some ads of land. So from 500,000 ads, you are supposed to give away maybe 100, 200 for the public interest. Now you are using the same kind of jargon that is in the interest of the nation or for the larger public good. You will have to make a sacrifice. Here, giving away the 200 ads was the huge sacrifice that you were making. Whereas those fellows have to give up everything, go and get drowned in the rivers. Did you understand? So don't worry. The anthropology teacher would definitely appreciate you. Speak an anthropological voice, but maybe in order to fight your own fear, you try to criticize, but definitely it has to be done. Otherwise, don't attempt the question. If you are going to support the mainstream, you are not a fit case for anthropology, and hence there is no necessity of answering the question. I might look to be very highly, authoritative when I am saying that, but that's how the discipline is. Am I clear? Any other questions there? Now, when the second approach we are speaking about, administrative approach, it is more or less following what the political master said. So we understand that an administrator may not be having his own definite distinctive personality. We at the most believe that, look at that. Being an administrator, you would be very closely following your political master. When he had written 5 principles, I'll die with those 5 principles being an administrator. I think the administrators make the highest sacrifice in the larger public interest. Not in terms of the sacrifices that we were narrating in the previous case. Sacrificing maybe one's own zeal of maybe doing something different from what the political master must have thought. So at the most, what might happen, the administrator should be in a position to influence the political master so that his viewpoint may come up as a policy. But otherwise, for all practical purposes, you are going to execute what the political master had thought about. I was writing something there. Over-administration by the government of India. Over-administration, what we mean here is multitude of schemes, number one. And then sometimes a confusion. Just you finish writing, then I'll have to talk about something here. Must have come across these words. District Rural Development Agency or Authority, Modified Area Development Agency, MADA pockets, and then you have the cluster groups, that is C. Cluster groups. I thought I would just introduce you with some of the terms. We come across these terms in categories of tribal populations and habitats. See, what happens is, those of you who must have had bureaucratic experience by yourself or from your family, or if at all you were closely studying the kind of welfare state related things elsewhere in general studies, you must have come across this, that there are certain positions called project officers within agency called DRDA. See, generally what happens is, like how we have seen elsewhere in the world, say in Africa we have seen this, how the borders are drawn, creating a confusion in administration or creating a confusion about what a nation actually is there. When you're drawing administrative boundaries, if at all you are not taking into account the cultural homogeneity or cultural diversity therein, it would definitely end us up in some kind of a problem situation. I don't think at the time of formation of the districts, population dispersion or distribution of tribals would be considered as a big criteria. Recently they have created huge number of districts in Telangana. I don't think that was a factor there. Most of the time that is not a factor. So sometimes what happens is, a particular tribal group might be existing in more than one districts. If at all, you find that in a single district, it is like tribal habitations might be having a particular geographical boundary. Tribe is generally defined as a territorial group with distinctive cultural aspects. So territorial definition of a tribe is the most predominant definition. So if I am taking that, it might be possible that a tribe is totally located in a particular district. So for the administrative purposes, for the execution of the developmental activities, etc., the district collector would solely be responsible. But suppose the geographical extent of a tribe is much, much beyond a district, not simply one, but maybe it is extended to several districts. A very fit case that we give for this kind of a situation is the Chenchu territory. The Chenchus actually extend into 5 major districts of erstwhile Telangana and AP. 5 major districts. Now there are a number of them there. I am sticking to 5 there. And see the amount of money that comes into, the kind of schemes that are to be implemented on them. It is not simply with the help of one single district collector there. When I am saying 5, this becomes a very huge huge mega district actually. So the PO of ITDA there is so powerful that he is not actually answerable to any of the district collectors there. He is directly communicating to the minister or the secretary to the minister. And when such kind of a situation emerges, it is not simply money that becomes important, the power that is yielded by that post. So generally, when you know, get selected and when you look for the positions, you try to have the most sought after positions. When we say most sought after, one may be the power equation, the other may be the kind of funds you deal with in the position. This is one of a very prime one. So I will come back on this particular thing when we go to, you know, tribal administration and several things. I would want to talk about this. Mada pockets are nothing but the small time territories that we find in each of the districts. So it's not like, so if I have to draw, there's so many districts out there. Suppose in all of them, in most of them, this tribe is actually found. We can put this under a project officer, whether you call them ITDA project officer. But suppose there is some other tribe which is there in this district alone. This has to be governed by DRDA, for which in most of these states, district collector functions as the head of the office. So it is like, you know, one considerable chunk of region is taken up by a tribe, and because such a good number of, a good percentage of people are existing, generally it is said that, you know, if it reaches about 50% of the overall population, it is a fit case to have a DRDA there for the cause of the tribal development. But suppose you find small groups in an otherwise non-tribal district, you find certain small populations of tribals that are spread across. These small pockets, we call them cluster groups, for which a full-fledged officer may not be necessary, a full-fledged office may not be necessary. A district collector with his existing machinery, with some bit of extension of the operations, these can be handled. This is the whole thing. Am I there with you? We'll go back there. When I say, Anji sir. When I'm talking about ITDA, a project officer, ITDAs are the ones that are to cater to the needs of very widely spread tribal population, technically which is spread out into more than one districts, where there is a requirement of a special officer, and he has to be there in addition to whatever district collectors' operations or functions that are there. But when it comes to certain tribal groups that are existing within the district and in a considerable region, in a considerable extent there, so that their importance can be gauged, not simply by the geography, by the numbers also. If they are considerable, then district collector would have to function with an additional work there as a chairman or, you know, a president, whatever nomenclature you are using in different states. As DRD was a president or a project officer within DRDO, the district collector would be dealing with the developmental activities of the Mada pockets. Mada pockets are nothing but those are the considerably spread tribes within a particular district. But there is also a possibility that in otherwise a non-tribal district, if at all small groups are dispersed, not in continuity, but in some regions here and there, they also need some kind of a special focus and governance. That task is taken up by the district collector without necessarily having an office of this kind, and definitely not without an ITD. Am I clear? What we mean by over-administration by Government of India, or any government for that matter, is one is multiplicity of schemes. You must have also seen many times, for the same thing, you would be having umpteen number of schemes. Sometimes only with the small change in the nomenclature, you are launching newer schemes. Sometimes Government of India launches, sometimes the state governments come up with their own schemes. There are so many intersecting points. There may be so many interests that might be involved. And see, what might happen is the people at the ground level, you are creating a confusion for them for the same thing when multiple schemes are there. And that is the reason why from time to time, Government of India, especially after the 12th plan, they are trying to prune out the schemes so that older ones, you will have to say goodbye to them. And whatever is functional, you should keep them. That's what we say over administration. And then, of course, the last but one here, this has been a very long-term complaint. Even till today, this is not resolved. We don't have a separate cadre for tribal welfare. But then some of the states have. Some of the states have their own tribal welfare officers. Like, AP has a tribal welfare officer. They select based on certain exams. Not all states where tribals are actually there in considerable numbers, considerable percentages. Because there is no cadre of tribal welfare, you are trying to fill those posts with somebody from outside. One very glaring example is, suppose a forest officer is posted as a tribal welfare officer. Now, this has been happening many times. Unless otherwise that person has a proper understanding of these two departments, and if at all he is posted in tribal welfare, how his personality has to be changed, how he looks at things has to be changed. Unless otherwise he has that kind of an insight. The problem is that he would be doing what he was trained under Forestry Ministry. So right from the first day it is taught that conservation of the forest wealth is important, and the inhabitants there are also responsible for loss of the habitat. This is the kind of a training that is given. If at all that is the kind of a training that you are into, you would be considering tribals not as somebody whom you will have to take care. You would be looking at them as the enemies of the forest, and you would want to prune them down. That is also the reason why in a number of such fields, whether you say doctors to function in the tribal areas or teachers to function in the tribal areas, we call for having a separate cadre of tribal welfare so that your training will be altogether different. So mainstream training is different from the tribal training. We will be looking at that in the question of education once again. There is one other approach which is a continuation of what we have seen in Ghurye's case. Actually, these are only a couple of names that I have picked up, but we are going to have another lecture separately on non-governmental organizations and their role. Your syllabus mentions that clearly, NGOs, their role in tribal and rural development. NGO business is very popular these days. We call it business only. Now you will have to understand that different religious groups might be having a different approach towards the tribals. In an article that you will be reading at a later point of time, titled, "Are All the Tribals Hindus?" people like Ghurye pointed out that many tribals in India are Hinduized, not because somebody has thrusted Hinduism on them. It is primarily because this has been the largest religion of all times. And wherever you go, the tribals are actually coming in contact with the Hindu faith, and hence there's more of tendency of Hinduization. But see, he looks at something else here. And in the beginning of all this discussion, when I said that he's calling them backward Hindus and asking for assimilation into them, he very clearly also mentions that this assimilation is in their best interest, because once they are coming into the mainstream fold, it would pave a way for them towards being governed by the mainstream governing agencies. See, every case of assimilation, every case of conversion has got its own specific objectives. So we have seen in the impact of Christianity, what we have seen there was people were getting into missionary activities so that they can multiply the numbers into their faith. And mostly there it ends. So their objective is, you come, we will all pray together. But here it doesn't end there. For people like Ghurye, you'll have to come into the mainstream Hinduism, not simply for the faith. It is not majorly for the faith. It is not majorly for the faith. The final objective is, see, all of us, whether it is mainstream Hindus or the tribals or the so-called backward Hindus, all of us, one fine day, should be governed by the same central authority. That is majorly the result of the mainstream Hindu society. Why I indulge in this talk is, see, one can write answers of tribal affairs without studying any anthropology. You have been doing that in general studies. Even in anthropology, people have been writing answers without much of a talk about what different thinkers have actually spoken. And the expectation is that examiner should give you good marks. Now, religious approach to tribal welfare. Different religions had different viewpoints about tribal welfare. A popular Hindu ideology that was given by Ghurye was that it is finally to be governed by the common authority that is the result of the mainstream Hindu society, if that is clear to you. Now, when you are comparing it with the Christian missionaries, they are actually not starting with the premise that you get converted first and later we will decide about your welfare. It's not that way. Their activities started before somebody has decided to think of conversion in the first place. So in a way, the missionaries had taken the responsibility of welfare even before a government is introduced to the tribals. This is not my view, Debar Commission said. Don't consider me as a missionary activity kind of a thing. But unfortunately, see, I repeat that sentence. The Christian missionary activity extended welfare of the tribals even before they are introduced to the mainstream governance. But it looks to be unfortunate that once they have come into the Christianization, whether their interest of being governed in a fit way as they must be thinking is really possible or not. See, it is something like this. A big group is welcoming, a small group is welcoming. Now, if you are objectively thinking, is it that if I am going to a big group, my interest will be taken care, or if I am going this way, my interest will be taken care. The problem is here they are not interested in keeping your interest. Here they are interested, but they can't do much. So either ways, you're not getting much. Are you with me? Are you with me? So it looks to be a very glim picture there, but can't really help it. And those are the organizations, whether you say Ramakrishna Mission or Arya Samaj, these are the ones who actually we give them as examples for spreading the mainstream education service activities. If at all somebody from the Hindu world of the voluntary organizations who could compete with the activities of the Christian missionaries, these are the people who actually stand in the first row. But we will be seeing several others at a later point of time. Some of them I'm trying to show here.
Sandra really works for religious dreams
Who?
as a competition.
Uh-huh.
Ramakrishna Mission and Arya Samaj. Really did this work as a religious dreams or as a competition to Christian.
It may not be that way. See, I don't see if we are speaking at a time much later to the event, we may try to give a conclusion. See, some activity is going on there, some activity going on here. At that particular point of time, time has passed, and from the later ages, I am trying to see back and trying to analyze the situation. When both of them more or less are happening at the same time, I might conclude that, okay, both of them are working in competition. But that is the kind of a situation, but it was not happening that way. Everybody was trying to do their bit. अब कहने में क्या जाता है, somebody comes up and says that, okay, when I'm giving this statement in comparison, I am not saying that they were competing with each other. If at all that made you ask that question, they were not competing with each other. See, my religion is good and my social work is good. It was not that kind. They were doing the work in their own right. But I was making a comparative statement saying that among so many voluntary organizations from the so-called Hindu mainstream world, if somebody could compete in terms of the service they must have done, it is that. Otherwise there is no competition as such. I wish it would have been, at least for social work. This is the approach voluntary organization. Many more, multitude of organizations we are going to see, categorize, and you have to in the first place understand that the term voluntary organization is very much different from the so-called NGOs. We are going to see in that particular class evolution of NGOs in India. Somehow, being an anthropology student, we cannot stop ourselves from writing historical answers. Evolutionary historical ones. These are some of the names which I really like. Red Cross, I love donating others' blood to Red Cross. So, and then Anveshi and Positive people, they are from Hyderabad. That's how we are closely associated with Anveshi, a women-related organization. So I'll have to popularize whenever opportunity comes. Whatever may be the names, they are randomly taken. The last ones, especially Positive people, Anveshi, they were started as NGOs only. Rest of the ones at different points of time had the title of voluntary organizations. We are going to see in that particular question of NGOs, how voluntary organizations got transformed into NGOs. Some of them were very popular, Servants of India Society, very popular, and then Bihar Adim Jati Seva Mandal, where some of our erstwhile presidents were involved. They worked with Bihar Adim Jati Seva Mandal. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was associated with Bharatiya Adim Jati Seva Sangh. Big time names. Some of them, of course, definitely worked as an extended arm of Congress itself. Now, I was saying that we will be seeing at a later point of time how voluntary organizations have actually transformed into NGOs. What is different there, or what is missing in the later one, is voluntarism. Voluntarism is you do certain things, you contribute things without expecting things back, generalized reciprocity. Whereas in NGO, what we see is a negative reciprocity. It is not even balanced reciprocity. You try to give little to the society and try. I'm not criticizing any NGO, and I'm not also trying to generalize in the criticism. Some of you must be running the NGOs, your families must be running the NGOs. My congratulations to you all. But in most of the cases, what we find is NGO had become something like a bureaucratic organization these days. NGOs have become bureaucratic organizations, and NGOs also have to maintain their balance sheets properly so that they can keep getting their funds. So it is a cost-benefit analysis that becomes much more important than whether you are able to bring a considerable change in the society. But coming back to that question here, voluntary organizations' approach towards the tribal welfare, meaning that these are some people, some dispersed groups, may not be directly working under the government, but definitely these were the people who have been rendering their services as an extended arm of the government, or they were something like, the organizations that were in a position to give the feel of the people, pulse of the people to the governments. We are going to see many more things in NGOs related question there. See, it's like many times you will not be in a position to express everything to your father, who is actually the authority. You might actually be resorting to some other route in order to communicate things. Maybe your mother, maybe your grandmother. The channel that may communicate what you actually want to the authority. So the father in this case is a governmental organization. The later ones are the non-governmental entities. And these are the non-governmental entities that can feel the pulse of the people, the needs of the people. Sometimes they initiate several things even before the governments initiate. There are very popular ideas such as watershed development. Government of India did not start them first. There are several private organizations, non-governmental organizations, they started with this idea. They popularized this idea. And once government feels that, okay, the situation is ripe so that I can come with a massive program, then government will start interfering. And then it would start with massive programs of watershed development. And this as an example I'm saying. Generally what happens is any new technology, any new scientific concept, any new social concept, they emerge from the NGOs and later they would be owned by the government. For example, a concept that has become very popular these days, such as the social audit. Big time articles are written how social audit has to be conducted and who should be the members in that auditing body, etc., etc. These have been initiated by small groups of officers in the country in small pockets. When smaller initiative, and if at all I am allowed to say, in southern part of India, the Chenchu region was the first one to start with such kind of a thing. So it was as simple as whenever the governmental monies were allocated, the central place in the village where, whether you call it a community hall or some kind of a school building, some kind of panchayat building, where officers started to write in clear terms, this is the money we are actually going to get, and then these are the needs that we are going to have, and then at the end of the said period, they would come back to see how much monies were actually spent and what are the various initiatives or the projects they have. Maybe a small dam, maybe a small road or a small school building, or maybe some kind of a water facility, a small time, nallas that you would want to have. So this kind of a work, and then ask them whether they are happy with it, and then what kind of other necessities they are, whether the things that we have executed are in a way strengthening your social fabric or not. Now, this is the kind of the approach, a small time thing. Interestingly, what happens is when international organizations are coming up with their funds, And our officers are getting trained under several schemes. Small experiments that are happening elsewhere. In fact, we have borrowed this from the Eastern African experiments, the so-called social audit, and we have popularized in the Asian subcontinent. That's how things are. So NGOs come up with the ideas and then government owns. This is what is voluntary organizations approach. These are not the full-fledged arms of the government, but they would be having their own sets. So government has hundreds and thousands of things to do. They might be identifying one or two things, and then they try to go deeper, and then they would want to come up with their own plans and approaches, involvement of people, talking to people, what is the problem actually. These are the ones that have been helping in an otherwise colonial bureaucratic mindset. Somehow, at least till a decade ago, this kind of a tendency was there that you should not go very close to the people. There has to be a distance that you will have to maintain. Somehow the distance would keep the respect. It's as simple as you would want to approach your hero. You would want to touch him and do all kinds of things to him. But then those, what are they? Bouncers. The bouncers are there, other fellows are there who would bounce you back whenever you would want to go touch him. That physical barrier actually, just imagine if your hero, whenever you want, he's available to be touched and to be looked and to be talked to you. He would not have that kind of a respect. Sometimes, secrecy gives the kind of aura, a surprise element, what might be there inside. That surprise would give that, and that is the kind of colonial mindset. A distance has to be there, but slowly.
Ma'am, you told that over the time became NGOs, some became NGOs also.
Actually, now we don't see the spirit of voluntarism at all.
So, are there any voluntary organizations who became pressure groups too?
We will be talking about them. That's going to be another lecture actually. Voluntary organizations, and we are going to have one popular fellow called K.S. Singh. He is known for writing the contemporary evolutionary theories. So we will be using them. Even in tribal movements, we are going to see how the nature of tribal movements had been changing from time to time. We will see some of the voluntary organizations who became pressure groups and some of them who became governing bodies also. Anthropological approach, a bag of confusions. A bag of infightings. In fact, I did not air one video to you, maybe in the upcoming couple of classes. I didn't do it because some kind of voice problems are there in that video. It is basically about the Jarawas. That video I used to bring about the confusions that are there in the discipline. So in the Jarawa region, one anthropologist who is working and one other lady who is actually considered to be a development agent. So how those two are colliding and fighting about whose approach is the right approach. Of course, once you see, you will understand the lack of maturity in the lady and how well versed this man is. How the so-called development agent would want to extend the fruits of development, whether the receiver really wants to receive or not. ये है bag of confusions. Everybody criticizes them. First of all, you decide what you want. Whether you want tribals to be isolated, whether you want them to be assimilated, whether you want them to be half there and half here. A typical Nehruvian approach, with due respect. You are neither a capitalist nor a total socialist. You say that you want to get the best from both the worlds. It is not necessary that the best genes alone would come. It might happen that only the deleterious genes are meeting, and you are reaping the negative effects, not the positive effects. So whatever must have happened at certain episodes in the economy may be because that all those deleterious mutant ones are only we are getting, and the best ones we are not getting. This is one question that has to be ended with anthropological approach. You, in such cases, you will have to write about the confusion. Examiner knows when you are writing this that you are a mature fellow. Don't every time say that's the anthropological approach, hey, kind of a thing. You say that they lack a clarity. That is the negative aspect of anthropology. If they have to actually have some kind of a positive mark on the governance, on the tribal welfare, the respective nations, the respective departments in the particular nations of anthropology, they'll have to come to a conclusion. They'll have to know what should be their preference. See, what an anthropological task in, say, a North American subcontinent, it may not be same as an Indian subcontinent. Their functions, their objectives may be different, and your needs are different here. Let me take you somewhere. So, two things I was doing today. One was approaches to tribals. The second one is different approaches to tribal welfare. We will be continuing with where we have stopped in the previous class, that is tribal education. Just have a look at this. The vicious circle of tribal life will start somewhere or the other. Okay, parental education. It is generally said for tribals, illiteracy is a problem because they consider education, mainstream education, as a problem. They don't see the necessity of it. There are several other interlinking things. You have taken one picture in the previous class, poverty-centered one. It's as if parental perception is that there are two problems which we witness. One is children are not sent to the school because they don't trust the mainstream education system. We anyway will not get jobs by doing that. What will I do after finishing my 10th grade? I'll go back to the same Chenchu region and hunt the honeybees and nothing more than that. How does this 10th or intermediate education or maybe a BA will help me in hunting my lizards? There is no trust. Even if with a bit of trust they come to the school, the dropouts will be heavy because of various things. The various problems that operate with one another in relation to one another. Even if you are going for tribal education, not going for it, there are the other things you are getting exposed to. R.K. Sharma was writing at one place, along with the introduction of mainstream education, what we are introducing to them is the mainstream alcohol. They were happier otherwise with their own liquor, which was not so very intoxicating, but which called for certain occasions alone. But the mainstream alcohol, the cheap liquor, is available even on loans. खाता पे चलता है ना, daily थोड़ा एक ले लिया, and then at one point of time, seasonally I will repay. Maybe you can charge an interest on that. There are the other problems also. Mainstream is encouraging them to migrate, and their housing patterns may be changing. The language is a problem there. So even if you are being taught, then what are the kind of problems that we are witnessing? We have seen that cartoon in yesterday's class when they are going back and narrating the kind of stories which they are hearing in the class. The king and the queen live in the palace, and where is the palace for us? Or the boy was talking about something else. No, you go to church, you go to temple, and where do we go? What is actually being taught in the school books is not reflective of the reality. When it does not reflect the reality, you really can't. It's not simply this. Even in our own mainstream, in our own education, we understand this. We always look for some kind of a proof to come. The writing things from an empirical understanding becomes very much important. This is what we were seeing in yesterday's class. 2011 census, all India group stands at about 73%, scheduled tribe stays at 59%, and this number I wanted you to remember. And I was also asking you to do the chart back home of all the states and union territories and how they have been faring in literacy rates. I presume that you have gone through that particular picture. Now let me take you elsewhere. There are some questions which we keep on looking at. A couple of them we have seen in yesterday's class. Why should there be a separate attention to the tribals? Because they are a different kind in themselves. It may be ethnic group, it may be a cultural group. Because they are different, there has to be a different focus on them. When we say the different focus, maybe in terms of funds, maybe in terms of, sir, everything said and done, there are 3-4 major things there. One is what you are teaching them, meaning that the curriculum, the content. Secondly, how you are teaching them. Is it in their own language or in the mainstream language? And thirdly, who is teaching? Whether an insider is teaching, an outsider is teaching. If an outsider is teaching, what kind of an approach the outsider is having towards the students? Most often it is a high ethnocentric approach, or a kind of, putting down the children who belong to the tribal communities. And then there are certain infrastructural issues, where you are teaching, how much distance it is, what kind of facilities you are offering to them. These are the 3-4 major issues that form your answer. So it is like, whenever, as I was telling you in the previous class, whenever we are trying to answer a question on a tribal problem, you first know the magnitude of it, then you see what are the major hiccups there, and you try to demonstrate with some examples how certain measures have proved successful, and then you try to bring a massive list of suggestions. In many of the cases, we try to take up the committee reports, like the Debar committee or the Zaza committee report. This was the picture that we were showing in yesterday's class. Those of you who were not there, the conversation between the tribal child and his parent. Can I go? You also must have had many such questions when you were in the school and college, especially if you have come from a regional medium. And looking at the neighbors who seem to be talking fluently, but you are not able to make out whether that's the right English or not. Definitely they were speaking a wrong English, but you're not able to make out. I see. Tribals are a totally different economic level. They are not an industrial society. They may be hunter-gatherers, they may be pastoralists, they may be shifting cultivators, for whom what you're teaching may not be of any necessity. You remember what was said in that SSP schools video? The teacher was saying that the children out there cannot understand how electricity works, how a car functions or something else. But a mainstreamer cannot understand how a herb functions, or how can you identify the location of particular herbs and particular species. That the little fellow there can do. And here there is no sight of a tree. Forget about herbs, etc. You don't know how a tree might look like and how to climb a tree and fetch some kind of from some kind of tamarind or some kind of fruit from there. అదే మన ఫిదా సినిమాలో దట్ గర్ల్ ఆస్ks him, where do you get milk? Then he says grocery store, and then this girl takes him to the buffalo and then tries to pour milk on his face. That's where you get milk from, not in the grocery stores. So it's as if the grocery store fellow is producing milk and giving to you. Kind of. So we are living in a world that is so very unreal. That is the other question. Their dispersal, inaccessibility, where to establish a school, that to a functioning school, looks very difficult to understand how they can actually compete in a world of numbers, where people are looking for 99s and 100s and 97s. Your father is highly disturbed. Suddenly you got 94% from 97%, 3% fall in your score. It leads your father into suicidal tendencies. Either he will kill himself or he will kill you, because there is a 3% fall there. If you are from such a family, God save you. Language families. Tribal languages may not be found in the kind of, just read what is written there. Tribes encompass all the 4 family language families, many small groups speaking diverse languages and dialects, etc. Both education managers and teachers erroneously consider economic and societal reasons responsible for the low achievement there. Language also plays a major role in the low performance. Low self-image, this is what I wanted you to know. Low self-image of the tribal child. How the teacher approaches you, that's very important, especially if it is a tribal society and an outsider is put up as a teacher there. That's a punishment posting for him. He doesn't understand the child in the first place. Forget about the tribal child. The necessities of a tribal child. Treating him inferior. Low morale. Already he is inflicted by low self-respect. How one encounters the first teachers in the childhood, that decides what you are. I thought, ये थोड़ा सा problem है, just give me some time. This is one of very common criticisms in the tribal education, that you are not teaching them in their own language. If at all we teach them in their own language, what happens? Positive and negative. We feel very happy talking in our own language, expressing in our own language. You need not have to think what you're talking. But if it is a foreign language, you'll have to first think, you'll have to frame the sentence and then deliver. Understanding becomes difficult. Many times you should be referring to the dictionary. తెలుగులో చెప్పాలంటే హాయిగా ఉంటుంది, తెలుగులో మాట్లాడుతుంటే హాయిగా, హాయ్, జాయ్ఫుల్, యు అండర్స్టాండ్, ప్లెజెంట్లీ, నో వరీ. But the problem nowadays is that neither you know Telugu nor English. You ask us to talk in Telugu, the moment I start talking in Telugu, you don't understand. Very, very dangerous, sir. If that happens, tribals continue to perceive themselves to be inferior. Language is a big time barrier. Unless proper bridge programs are designed, it becomes difficult for adaptation of tribal child. So in the Gond region, one experiment was made. Initial education, the first couple of classes were in their own language, and then they introduced Telugu in their regular course. So unless the bridge program, it is not simply the language, the content also. Let me go. If the teacher comes from outside, that is the problem. Outsiders are appointed as teachers, administrators without access to their language and first-hand communication. So it is teaching the children in a language that they don't understand. Definitely they would not come to the class. For a few years I was skeptical actually. I always wanted to start with anthropological thought, but initially for a few years I was skeptical what would happen if I start with anthropological thought. But slowly I understood that we will have to train the students to first approach the most difficult things in the syllabus. Things would take some time for people to understand why this kind of an approach. But once you have understood, even if it is difficult, you have taken up UPSC understanding very well that it is not an easy one. As people repeatedly tell me, what do you do in the free time? It's only 3 hours of class. So teachers are a big problem actually, and if at all they don't understand a student. There are some case studies, sir. Quickly have a look at them. Why there is a less enrollment rate. Chenchus feel that they are already hard pressed for money and they cannot. There are the Sugalis or Lambadas who feel that there is no employment with this education. Even if I am doing MA, I will be at the same level. In many urban areas we see, the municipal corporations giving the very lowly jobs to scheduled tribes, scheduled castes in spite of their post-graduations. So somewhere it is like they're trying to showcase that the traditional caste-based occupations we are helping out and we are preserving. But at what cost you are doing that, that has to be seen. There are the others. Content of education, they are not really happy. India, as I was saying in the previous class, they don't understand medium of instruction. So different people have got different emic perspectives of why there is a less enrollment. Gonds have a problem with the teachers. Absenteeism of the teachers. There are the other things, location of the school, lack of infrastructure, social factors such as the gender bias. Of course, we have seen with the percentages in the all India population, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, gender difference looks to be very universal there. So mainstream is no different from a tribal community when it comes to the inequality in the literacy rates of the genders. These are all regional studies. I'm actually not naming the thinkers there. We are actually trying to get this information from regional tribal research organizations. We have several regional tribal research organizations. Some of the success stories there. I mentioned it many times in the class. Nizam's time, Heimendorf and Verrier Elwin, when they were working on the tribal Gond population, establishing tribal teachers, training schools, and then working on the Gond script, providing them different curriculum and textbooks. There are the other ones, Chenchu schools in the British regime. Whatever sparks that we see from the Chenchu world, that was because of those schools. This is still a functioning one, Mabadi. ITDA, Vijayanagaram. Sir, you can have a short note specially on ashram schools. And of course, in your general studies, this question was very popular, ICDS, Integrated Child Development Scheme. Assess the performance of ICDS across the years. If at all you have forgotten about ICDS back home, go through those 6 components of ICDS: early childhood care and protection, maternal education, maternal nutrition and care, Anganwadi schools, etc., etc. Whatever schemes are still in function, you will have to have them on your fingertips. These are some of the. We will have a look at the ashram schools also. Let me take you there. Before that, there is one other success story. Yeah. Kruti, that is an NGO currently working in the Godavari region, providing non-formal education to children and awareness of adult rights, teaching them in the Koya language, coming up with the bridge courses. Though they look to be small-time successes, if at all you come from those regions, you should go back, because many times things go unnoticed, even if they are just around your nose. Can I go? That was a Koya case. Government claims this one. Ekal schools, government says. When government says, we should believe. Ekal Vidyalayas, one village, one school, one kitchen, one teacher. Teaching one single subject in a single class itself is a difficult thing. Teaching multiple classes simultaneously, multiple subjects, you don't know what your tongue speaks. There was a time in my young days I used to start my class at 6 o'clock in the morning, close my mouth at 7 o'clock in the evening. So after a while, by the time you go to the afternoon, you don't know what your tongue is moving towards. There is one other successful experiment. That is the lady, linguistic anthropologist Kavita Rastogi, working on that particular tribe, trying to give the script to the Rajis. In fact, I told you this earlier also, Andhra University is known for linguistic anthropology. They are dedicated to working on the new scripts. So we have prestigious universities. NEHU is the most important one, Northeast Hill University, continuing with the traditions of teaching tribal issues in anthropology. Huge list of books are released annually. The rest of the world doesn't know that they are releasing so many books. So it looks to be very interesting when somebody is writing about themselves. Many from the outside world do not even know that they exist. Couple of books I would try to exhibit to you tomorrow. We don't find them in the mainstream markets, but no, they're so very renowned. Some of them are award winning. Sir, I want you to browse about this organization called Bhasha. That's a tribal NGO, Bhasha. Navveru. This is a brief synopsis about ashram schools. Self-reliance in education. So community contributes majorly, but once you come with particular number of children, you guarantee particular number of children, then government would come up with the cost sharing. Generally the percentages we have to remember: in the Union Territories, 100% central assistance there. Residential schools, education of the backward. But of course, in all the residential schools, that is the general problem that we witness: malnourishment, ill health, and child labor. That's where I feel so very proud about the social welfare hostels in Telangana, Swaros. The kind of activities, the kind of life they have been giving to the tribal children. It looks so very shocking and interesting. About 60,000 seats are there, more than 1 lakh applications come. And this year it is said that the applications are reaching about 2 lakhs to get admission in the social welfare schools, residential schools there. At one point of time, the upper classes, upper caste start feeling envious that why not we? The kind of encouragement, sports, and the kind of food, curriculum, it's really envious. So we should really thank him for all his efforts. These are traditional ashram schools spread across all the tribal regions of the country, with an emphasis on training them in their cultural activities. So for a traditional bamboo maker with basket maker with bamboo, you are incorporating that also in their regular education. You are not depriving them of a training in their traditional art and culture. You are training them for their own livelihood. If at all nothing works, their own livelihood also they are not forgetting. Also try browsing about this anti-illiteracy campaign. Anti-illiteracy campaign in Gujarat. Anti-illiteracy campaign in the Patan district. Anti-illiteracy campaign. This is especially for the tribal women in that particular district. I'm sure you would enjoy reading that. Acha. Because so much is said about education, etc., in fact, I don't want to waste your time by making you write a whole lot of recommendations from this committee. They gave about 25, 26 points as recommendations. I reduced them to 16. Not that others are not important. I was only looking at what can fit in your regular answers here. What I would generally do is for important committees and commissions, अच्छा ये तो मैं आपसे share करूँगी Zaza panel recommendations on education, etc. But I wanted to show you something here. This I still did not post on your Dropbox. This is actually that full-fledged report. You know? A report of the high-level committee on so-and-so, that is the year, socio-economic, health, education, etc. And that is the gentleman who became more than necessarily popular. And with due respects, I was telling you in the previous class that prior to this, several other writings came from him. We will be doing this. We will identify what are the topics that are necessary, where, in which topic in your syllabus they are necessary. 9.1, 6.1, those are actually where you will have to study. And once you go inside, we will be highlighting certain things which are necessary for your exam. And we will also be adding some additional note. See, for example, on PISA, there's something written there. But that I feel insufficient for answering a full-fledged question on arguments related to, etc., etc. So we will be adding some bit of information there. Yet in many places actually, you don't find substantial things. It seems to be that Debar is being repeated there. Or in the recommendations, no substantial thing you might be finding. But wherever it is necessary, we would do that. And certain organizations also, which I am expecting, like Anthropological Survey of India, functions of Anthropological Survey of India. If a short note is asked on this organization, Archaeological Survey of India, at least 3-4 such organizations you will have to prepare on them. Those also I will be adding. So this is one document. After doing some bit of more work on this, I will be sharing the document with you. So don't worry about studying more than 400 pages, that you will not anyway do. Anyway, students would come and ask for abridged versions, and market will also be filled with abridged versions. जो भी government बड़ा document देता है, market will provide abridged document. They would abridge whatever is necessary, and they would place only whatever is unnecessary, with due respects. But we'll see. So in the original document only you will be studying. That gives an additional, kick. If you are doing it from the original document, 400 पन्ने वाला पढ़ रहे, उसमें से आप 40 पन्ने भी नहीं पढ़ोगे actually. So that looks to be much better. Let me take you to the other one here. I am mostly basing on Debar committee. Defining health and illness is a cultural thing. Different cultures perceive health and illness differently. In several communities, a continuous diarrhea for 15 days is also not considered to be illness. Unless otherwise it interferes in your daily affairs and you are not able to carry out your regular tasks. Only then the community might come up to think that, okay, there is some kind of intervention necessary. Unless the community thinks that you require some kind of a special attention and something like a cure or something like an assistance is required, only then the concept of illness comes into picture. But otherwise, for all practical purposes, that is the definition of health. We follow the WHO's definition, a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely absence of disease and infirmity. Not being unhappy is not happy. It's as simple as that is. Now what we do here is, we'll see some of the basic definitions. Then I will take you to categorization of diseases as perceived by Debar. Have a look at these numbers. Popular health indicators, infant mortality rate. Tribes have more. Neonatal mortality, we are almost on the same plane. Postnatal mortality, child mortality, under 5 mortality, antenatal checkups. So naturally that has to be more in the regular population. Institutionalized deliveries, etc., etc. primary statistics you will have to know, sir. Even if you hate numbers, you will have to remember. The highlighted ones, they are the cause of concern. And one, so we'll see some of the important definitions which you must have studied when you refer to census. Child mortality, institutionalized deliveries, percentage households covered by health schemes or insurance. See, 2.6 itself is not the concern, 31.9 is also a concern. The coverage of health and life is so very small there. As most of us know, it is very difficult to sell the policies, especially if they are life insurance policies. Because we should start by saying that if you die, death is considered to be very highly inauspicious. Can I go? If you're done with your numbers. Sir, there is one topic in chapter 11, paper 1, terms such as mortality, fertility and fecundity. Mortality, fertility and fecundity, you are going to use these definitions there also. Being mortal fellows, we'll have to know what are the different kinds of mortalities. I am so very unhappy with reading about coming across that huge episode in Las Vegas where that old man. Those are the primary terms. In a way, we are in a very docile society. Forget about being violently expressing your frustration. You don't try to express your frustration in any way. You don't show it on your face also that you are frustrated. You are always there with a happy face, come what may. The culture of tolerance that we teach in Indian society. You accept anything and everything so very peacefully. Let us see some of these definitions. Crude death rate, age-specific death rate, IMRs, cause-specific death rate, life expectancy at birth. Most of you know these things, but just as a recalling. Crude death rate, number of deaths in a calendar year in a geographical area, mid-year population, or nothing but the average population. But the jargon is that. Crude death rate, number of deaths in a calendar year. Can I go? As far as the statistics from the census is concerned, we would be doing with the 11th chapter. How the crude death rate was changing in India, how was it reflecting on the demo. Can I go, ma'am? Age-specific death rate, everything remains the same. It's only that one word that gets added there. A specific age group in the geographical area. Age-specific death rate. So that gives an indication of which age group is turning out to be more mortal. Age-specific death rate. You have the other one, infant mortality rate, very popular indicator of mortality or health, number of deaths of infants during calendar year, total live births, One list of food taboos I will be sending you in another 2 to 3 days of time. Food taboos and how they are reflected in the nutritional deficiency disorders. Under 5 mortality rate, death of the children between 0 and 4 in a calendar year, to the total live births. Under 5 mortality rate. Can I go? And that is cause specific death rate. Annually, WHO releases a report, Global Health Report, where they try to identify 5 major reasons for mortality in that year. So as a practice goes in general studies, you might be referring to several annual reports of different international organizations. WHO is one of them. I am sure you are not reading the entire report, but at least the first chapter, which is actually synopsis. Generally, in most of these reports, we recommend the student to read the first chapter, which forms the synopsis. Popularly now, accidental deaths are becoming vehicle accidents, road accidents. These are the ones that are, climbing up the ladder. You take this brief categorization, then we will be talking about it in your next class. What are the causes of ill health in the tribal world? Categorization given by Debhar Commission. Culture contact related diseases, socio-cultural specific and ecology specific. Developmental diseases and the others. The term developmental diseases is about with the progress of life, with the developmental programs, you are exposed to new set of diseases. When you don't have food, there is one problem. When you have more food, there is obesity. The problem is either you totally don't have, when you have in plenty. Due to them, several set of diseases and more prevalence of malaria at the epidemic level. So when you have riches, what you eat, that shows on your body. Maybe otherwise you are not venturing into such foods, but with more money at hand, you are making them your regular habit. How many pizzas and burgers and kind of stuff with so much of cheese. It should go and settle somewhere in your body, it will do that. AIDS, some people call it also a developmental disorder, but he doesn't agree with that. It may be definitely a culture contact related one, a lifestyle related one. Food taboos, nutrition deficiency disorders and hepatitis B related other things. Mineral deficiency, waterborne diseases, tuberculosis. We'll talk about them in detail in tomorrow's class. The statement there is much more interesting. Whatever may be the causes, most of the time they blame it on magic and sorcery. It is explainable if it is a tribal society, highly illiterate in terms of the modern education. If they are saying that it is a magic and sorcery that is responsible for the disease, fine. From here, we will be taking it up in your next class. We are at 67. We started with approaches to tribals. Then approaches to tribal welfare. Then tribal education. We are starting to do with tribal health. Sir, in your assignment segment for the self-study or references, you should be studying various tribal welfare schemes in education. This you can do from your India Annual, Tribal Welfare Schemes in Education. And I want you to separately prepare on ashram schools. Have a good time.